Hey, welcome back. And in this video, we're going to begin our discussion on modules in Python. And this is a good segue from our previous lesson on Python functions, because modules will allow us to take many functions and separate them out of our code into separate files, and then import them back in, but only the functions that we need. So let's jump in and see how this works. Now you'll notice that I am in Visual Studio Code for this example, not a Jupyter Notebook, because it's going to make it easier to understand what's happening with these external files. You'll see that I have a python.py file. .py is the Python extension. And I have another file. This is my external file called createpizza.py. And in createpizza.py, I have defined two different functions. One that lists toppings by receiving arguments of a size of a pizza and toppings on a pizza. And then it goes through and it will print us out a message telling us how big the pizza is and the toppings on the pizza. And a second function that takes in a first name, last name, and thanks a customer for their order. Okay, that is our external file. Now, as a special note, that file is saved in the same directory as the file that we're working in, our python.py file. So let's take a look at how do we bring in that external create pizza file and use the functions within it while keeping it external for ease of use in our code. Well, it's very simple, actually. All we have to do is, for our first example, is we can just import the entire module by using create pizza. So import create pizza. That now tells Python, hey, when you're creating our program, bring that entire file into memory, and we're going to be using those functions. So let's do that. Let's list some toppings. To do that, we will do create. We have to call the file name create pizza, and then the function name, which is list toppings, and then provide the arguments. So our arguments in this case are a 12-inch pizza. Okay, and let's see, we got to create a list, and our toppings can be cheese, gotta have cheese, and peppers, and some pineapple. Okay, so we're passing a 12-inch pizza with these toppings. Okay, so I'm going to save our Python file, and then up in the top right corner we have this button that lets us run the Python code. So we're going to click that play button, and there you go. Down in our output, we can see that it ran and it exited successfully, and it ran through our external function. You are creating a 12-inch size pizza with the following cheese, and then with peppers, and then with pineapple. So it successfully passed this over to our external function over here, ran the function, and printed it out. Okay, so that works. Now, you can also import this as an alias. So just a quick example, if you didn't want to call create pizza every time, you could say import create pizza as CP for create pizza. And then down here you could just type cp.listToppings. That's going to do exactly the same thing. If I hit the play button, well, I got to save it first. Sorry. So I hit the play button. Now it's going to come and generate another one. There we go. And it works. So this is using an alias if you don't want to type the full file name every single time. And if these file names get longer, this can come in very, very helpful. Now, remember that when we import an entire module, we're importing every single function into memory to use our program. Now that might not always be necessary. We might only need certain functions. Now in our example, we've only got two functions, not a big deal, but you might create a functions file that does certain manipulation of code, and there's 20 different functions in there, and you just don't need to load all of them into memory. So instead of importing create pizza, what you can do is you can say from create pizza. So from that file, import, and let's import this function, customer name. Customer name. So if I was to comment this out, Now, when we run this program, it only will bring and load in this customer name function, this second one, and it will completely ignore this top one. So we can do that, and we can say, okay, let's run customer name. Oh, and when you do this too, you don't have to prefix it any longer with the file name because you're using the actual function name that you've included. And aliases still work. If you wanted to use import customer name as CN, customer name, that still works. Okay, and we could say, okay, we need a first name, Billy, and a last name, Johnson. All right. Let's save that. Let's run it and see what happens. There we go. Thank you, Billy Johnson, for your order. So it did work. It brought in the customer name function and as a CN alias, and it worked accordingly. Now, just to note, if we tried to run this list toppings function, it would give us an error because it did not bring that function into our program in any way. Okay. What about importing all functions in a module? Now, it's possible to import all functions as we did here without having to type them all out, but it is not recommended. And let me explain why. If I do from create pizza, import star. This is doing similar to this, but it's going to come in here and load all of our functions in. Now, how does that differ though from what we did up here? Importing an entire module. How does that differ from importing all functions? Well, when you import an entire module, it also imports all of your functions into memory, but you must call all of those functions by the file name or by the alias of the file name, like we did here, cp dot and the function name. Down here, you don't need to use the alias or file name. You can, just like we did up here, you can just call customer name Homer Simpson. Okay. Comment this out. Save it. Push play. And there we go. Thank you, Homer Simpson, for your order. I can also use the list toppings function because it's also loaded into memory. So where does the complication come? Well, again, if you have a external file that has 20, 30 different functions in it with all these different function names, and you load them in using an import star, it loads all those into memory, and you could have a conflict if any of those function names already exist in your program somewhere else. That's why it's much safer if you just want to import all of your functions from the file, that you use this syntax instead, where you have to call the file name to make sure that if you have two different functions called customer name in this function, and then you use customer name somewhere else in your code, you don't have a conflict. Okay, and that's what that does. So I hope that's helped clear up a little bit of modules and importing modules, because in our next lesson, we're getting into object-oriented programming, where we're going to start talking about classes and methods and objects. So I'll see you in the next lesson.